Okay, in this demonstration, I'm going to show you how you can install WordPress on your localhost computer. What you want to do is go to wordpress.org/download, and then on that page, you're going to click on this download, and it's going to take a minute to download. And if I go here and I look in my downloads folder, you'll see that I have the WordPress zip file. And what I did, it was actually, when I originally downloaded it, it actually ended up having something that looked just like this. So I know that this is WordPress 4.0, so what I did was I went ahead and I changed it so that it says WordPress 4-0. And whenever I unzipped it, I went ahead and I named this WordPress 4-0. And the reason is that I think if you haven't seen the other demo, I like to have a clean copy of my download so that if something should happen in the process of uploading files or moving files and something gets corrupted, in that process, I can always come back to the original files and I can replace with the original files. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and open up I'm going to close this out real quick. I'm going to open up my XAMPP control panel, and just ignore that. And in my XAMPP control panel, you want to go to Manage Servers and make sure that your Apache web server is running, but also this time you want to make sure that MySQL database service is running. So if it's not, then go ahead and start those services. They both have to be running. Come back to welcome, and then you can click on go to application. If you've modified your XAMPP the way that I've shown you how in my class, then it should take you to something that looks like this, where you've got a link to XAMPP, but it doesn't actually automatically load the original XAMPP files. So if you want to be able to access phpMyAdmin, and that's what we're about to do, then you want to click on the XAMPP link. Hopefully you didn't destroy or get rid of those files. And it should take you to an interface that looks like this. XAMPP automatically comes with phpMyAdmin, which is really handy, so you don't have to download it from the website. So we're going to go to phpMyAdmin, and if you already watched the demo, then this is going to sort of look like a more updated, styled version of what we saw on the class server. But if you are just watching this one for the first time instead, basically this is a web interface that will go ahead and talk to the MySQL service, database service that's installed in your computer so that you don't have to do command line stuff. And it comes by default with some tables that you should probably just leave alone. Just don't even worry about those. And right now, just so you know, you're logged in as the root level user. And if I were to go up here where it says users, you'll see what the current users are on this installation right now. What's going to be really different between the way that you set stuff up on our class server versus the way you set stuff up on localhost is that localhost is going to allow you to create users and grant them permissions to use certain databases. You can create databases and delete databases. On our class server, you don't have that permission to do so. I've basically given every student access to one database with one database user. So you're going to be a little bit more limited with what you can do on the class server, because you only have one database and one database user. But if you wanted to do some experimentation on your localhost environment, then you can create as many databases and as many users as you want. So here's what my recommendation is going to be to you. The easiest way on localhost to create your user and database is to click on Add User. And then whenever it prompts you, you're going to give it a name. And this is where if you want to make the database the same to match it for, like where it's like student 025 or something, you can. But you don't have to. But just for the simplicity and sake of being consistent, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it the same username as we have on the server. And where it says any host, that's what this % sign means, is it means any host. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say localhost. This host name would be very different on the class server. It's that really long weird one where it's like student025.db and it's got some number, right? Well, here it's just going to be localhost. And here's where you could put your password. Now, here's the thing. You might go, okay, well, I've got a user, I've got localhost as the host, I've got my password, but one of the things that we're missing so far is the actual database. Well, right down here where it says database for user, if we create the user before the database, then we can go ahead and click on create database with same name and grant all privileges. So it'll make a database called student025 and it'll give us full privileges to use that database. Okay, so that's what I'm going to click is this one. And down here, don't worry about global privileges. You don't need to worry about that. And then just hit go. And it tells me that I've added a new user. It's called student 025. Its access is on localhost. And you know, if I decided that I didn't like this user that I created, I could also click here. I'm not going to do it, but I could click here and it's going to pop up with a warning, and I could say go, and what it would do is it would remove any selected user as long as that's selected, and it would drop the database that's associated with it, that has the same name, I should say. So let's go ahead and see how this thing will work. And actually, really quickly also, you have a lot more options in this view than you will on the class server. So for instance, you'll see up here, it gives you like a breadcrumb trail. This tells you that you're in the very top level. So if I click on server localhost, you see all of these tabs up here. They pertain to all the databases. Well, if I want to use a database, then I click on student 25, for instance, and it's telling me that I'm going to use that database, and up here it tells me now that I'm in that database. So now these tabs all pertain to what happens inside of that database. So for instance, if I were to search, it would only search in that database. But if I had tables on here, I could click the actual table that was also installed, and it would allow me to search that table on that database. So we have 0 tables. That's why it's asking me, do I want to create tables? Whenever I click on student 025, I have nothing in there. Well, I'm not going to create a table right now because that's what our installation is going to do whenever we go and use the installer files that WordPress gives us. So let's just sort of put this aside for a minute, and I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to go to localhost. And one of the things you'll notice is that we don't have a project 2 here. We don't have any WordPress folder or anything like that. So what we need to do is go into our file system, okay, and I need to copy from my downloads folder. I want to copy this WordPress 4-0 folder into my htdocs. So I'm just going to copy it like this. I'm just doing an option drag on my Mac, or it'd be control drag on your Windows computer. And then here's my WordPress installation. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it Project 2. You can call it whatever you want. Project 2 sort of makes sense, but if this is in fact your second project. Now, one of the things I want to show you about renaming this, and I don't know if I mentioned this on the last video or not, but if I rename this now, it's fine. But once I go ahead and I start setting up the installation, I can't rename it without making a lot of other changes in the database, because once I install it, it's going to look for this pathway. So it would look in the root level web directory, you know, for htdocs. It would look in the root level, and then it would look for project 2. If I left it as the name WordPress, it would look for WordPress. If I left it as some other name, it would look for some other name. And it's going to rewrite all of its URL navigation and stuff based on that name. So it's important that you make a decision about what you name it sort of right now. It's not to say that you can't rename it later, but it's a lot harder. Okay, so now that that's there, if you look inside of this folder, you'll see that we have a whole bunch of files. Like if you were to look inside this index file, you would see some things that would do some conditions. And one of the things that it's going to look for is to see if the config file has already been created. And we don't see anything in here called WP config. We just see WP config sample. So what it would do is, if it can't find a config file, it's automatically going to run a setup where it's going to prompt us to go ahead and set a file up. So let's go ahead and walk through that. Now that we have, I'm going to refresh this localhost, now that we have our project 2 folder or WordPress folder in our localhost. So now if I click on that, it's going to walk me through and it's going to ask me, okay, if you're going to set this up, you need to have a database name, a database username, password, database host, table prefix. Well, we have all of those things. So let's go. Well, we decided a minute ago, or at least I did, that my database name was going to be student 25. And then also the username was also student 25. Okay, my password, okay, and then I have my password. And localhost is going to be the database host that we're using for our local setup on our localhost environment. Now, the table prefix, I already discussed this once before, but I'll remind you, in a different video I discussed it, that you don't want to leave it as WP because that's the default installation table prefix, and that's easy for malicious users to target when they're trying to write exploits for your websites. So I'm going to do something like P2 since it's project 2. You can make it whatever you want. Just leave this underscore at the end because it makes it a lot easier if you need to look at it in the database to find your different table names. So I'm going to hit submit, and it's going to walk through, and it's going to give me, it might not do this to you, but it's probably going to happen to most of us. It's going to give us an error saying that we can't write the config file. This is one of those things that you run into on localhost, and it's probably because your computer is set up to kind of protect itself, and it has permissions that are not going to allow anyone but the owner of those files to write to the file system. Well, the owner is not writing to the file system right now. Right now it's the www user. It's basically the web user that, your computer, you don't even realize it maybe, but your computer has a web user account that allows it to use on port 80, and that's the user right now that's trying to write to the file system. So you're actually going to have to go and make some changes real quick, and it tells you what you would need to do. One option is that you can copy all of this, and it tells you that you can copy all of this, and you can manually create that WP config file. Well, we can do that. That's not a problem, but we are probably going to run into some other problems later where we're going to have to make adjustments. So just be aware of that. So I'm going to take all of this, going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it in a new Dreamweaver PHP file, save that. We're going to look in htdocs and project 2, and we're going to call it wp-config. And now if I go back to this page, it tells me, hey, it already exists. That's fine. So I can try to install it now. And it takes me to this place where we can go ahead and just walk through, and it'll get us into the back end. This part doesn't really matter all that much because we can change it later, but I'll go ahead and give it a project 2 name. We can, as I said, change it later. I'll do something like, that for the username. I don't recommend admin or administrator. It's too easy to crack. And go ahead and put in a password. Doesn't matter as much if it's not on a live server. If it's very weak, you'll just have to change it later when you upload stuff. And then put a valid email address. Please don't put mine. This is in case you lose your password. Click install, and the next screen is going to tell you it's successful. You go to login. You're going to log in with the credentials that you just created, and it's going to take you to the back end. And real quickly, if you just jump back over to your PHP My Admin, now if we go to student 25, there are all these tables, and they all start with this P2 underscore prefix that we told it to designate. Okay, so it automatically populated with new tables and put data inside those new tables. So if I were to look at any of them, it would, give me some information that it automatically generates and puts in there. Okay, so that's your basic install on localhost, and you can move on to the next demonstrations.